Hi, my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we talk about the best ideas of marketing. And my guest today is JD Pincus, the Chief Information Officer at AgileBrain. JD, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, David. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Often I interview people that are marketing experts like CMOs or people running tactical marketing software or something like that. But you and I have been talking about something far deeper and potentially much more interesting, which is human emotions, the role of human emotions in marketing. And you're clearly an expert in that area. And I just want you to start from the beginning. How did you get interested in the study of human emotions?
So it's a long story, but I'll keep it brief. So when I was in grad school back in the 90s, it was sort of the height of that what they call the cognitive revolution. Everything that they talked about, all the major dominant models at the time were about cognition. They were about thinking, and it was sort of using a computer metaphor for the brain. You have sort of inputs, you process them, and there are outputs. I think everyone was so in awe of computers and personal computing at the time that they had no choice. But there was a model, the elaboration likelihood model at the time, that was really dominant in my field in social psychology, and it basically proposed that there was a central route to attitude formation and change and a peripheral route. And the central route was the one that was important. The central route was, deliberation, analysis, the cogency of arguments, very kind of Aristotelian, maybe, sort of very logic based. And then there's this peripheral route, which was like everything else, emotions, heuristics, classical conditioning, as if that stuff is sort of, also ran. A funny thing happened while I was in grad school. I really, it didn't buy that. It didn't sound right. It didn't match my experience. I knew that, I certainly behaved out of emotion sometimes, when I was even aware of it, and that everyone else I knew did as well. I was also kind of coming off of my childhood where my father, who was a famous neurologist who studied, among other things, people who were repeat serial, killers and other kinds of violent offenders. And he knew, and he explained to me that the reason that they did what they did wasn't that they were necessarily bad people, it's that they had no control over their emotions. They basically had an emotion system that wasn't able to be regulated. And I couldn't really ignore, sort of my own experience and the things I learned from my dad. So when I got to grad school, I kind of had to carve out a unique niche. I actually did my research in a different building entirely than the psychology building because I wanted to do what I considered sort of real science. Instead of asking people to fill out questionnaires, we would have them actually, connect them to psychophysiological equipment, and show them rapidly exposed images and of emotional scenes and measure their reactions. So lo and behold, many decades later, I feel very vindicated. Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for his insights around thinking fast and slow, which is basically saying that he kind of flipped the central and peripheral routes. He said, System one, now is the premier one. System one is the immediate, emotional, intuitive way that we make decisions. And system two is the slow, deliberative, analytical, which is incredibly frail and can be easily overwhelmed. Uh, and it turns out we make our decisions, the vast majority of them, using system one, the emotional system. So I'll pause there. There's a lot more to it, but I basically got out of school and used every emotion trick, measurement trick that I knew, in a whole variety of different fields, and I did that for I don't know 20 plus years.
Fascinating. So is it, and I want to touch on a couple of things that you talked about there and kind of go a little bit deeper, but is it fair to say that there's kind of two realms of thought there? One's a logical decision-making framework and one's an emotional decision-making framework. Is that a gross
Exactly.
overstatement?
Exactly. No, that's right. Except I
Yeah.
think what the neuroscience is telling us is that there's a little bit of an illusion going on there in that our deliberate or the sort of logic is often the servant of the emotion. So the emotion is primary. We have the thing that we desperately need or want because of our emotional needs. And then our rational faculties concoct stories, plausible, cover stories that make excuses for why we should get what we want. And what we want is emotional, and the rational is basically just a way to justify it. And there's so much evidence of this now that's accumulated. And so I think the old view was, logic is supreme because that's what makes us different and special and better as humans. Uh, and the emotion was sort of a nuisance factor that we should try to explain away, or we'd be better off without. Now we understand that we are like the animals that we, evolved from, emotional beings, and we happen to have this little machine on top of it, which, we can tell stories with and provide, language and context and all sorts of justifications and rationalizations. That is not primary. That is definitely way down the list in terms of how it affects our behavior.
Interesting. So it's super important to understand your own emotional state, and as well as if you're in marketing or another field, understand the emotions of the people around you. I do want to touch base on your father's work because I think that that is super fascinating. Because I think that your illustration of kind of the criminals and emotional behavior is poignant because as I think of an example of no one's going to say something like, oh, logically, if I start this fight and hurt this person and I'm going to be better off because this is going to get me what I want and get me ahead in life, right? You could just see so many. Maybe there are some logical criminal enterprises out there, but it seems like our emotions can get us into trouble, and
Yeah.
a lot of criminal behavior or lawlessness or law breaking or hurting other people or is based on lack of control emotionally. So I guess that basically that's a clear, you know, illustration of what the point that you're trying to make, right?
Yeah. I mean, he kind of fell into it. He was a neurologist at Yale, and he was asked to consult on a couple of cases that a psychiatrist friend of his brought to his attention. She just needed someone to do the neurological evaluation. And these were cases of people who, this one in particular was a young girl who was riding the school bus to, middle school, and, no violent past or anything else, pulls out a knife and killed one of her classmates on the school bus. And he discovered that she had limbic seizures. She had this, problem. He was kind of creating these sort of paranoid feelings in her, which is why she had the knife. And she experienced one of these seizures, and then just kind of lashed out and took this life. And it was completely out of her control. And it really reminds me of a lot of the more recent neuroscience stuff that Antonio Damasio and his colleagues have discovered there, where you can put electrodes in people's brains and give a certain amount of current to it. And by the flick of a switch, you can take someone who's completely happy and normal and flick the switch, and suddenly they become depressed to the point of being suicidal. And they will explain to you why their life is so terrible. And they will justify it, exactly what I was saying before about the sort of sense-making system that we have. And then you flick the switch off again, and they're back to normal as if nothing happened. It really shows that our emotion systems are driving the bus and that we're all just sort of coming along for the ride. And we give far too much, credit to rationality.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of the music that I play. Maybe that's another trigger, right? So I can turn my music into my mood in for happiness to extreme sadness overnight, or no overnight, over a couple seconds, right? By playing
Yes,
some music. So I don't even need an electrode in my brain. I just hear something in my ears. But
exactly.
coming back to some of your research, so what do you do to understand human emotions? How do we do that? I mean, obviously, we can see kind of the range of emotions, a lot of documentation on that, but what have you done in your career and in your
Yeah.
field to help us understand human emotions?
So I've played around with pretty much everything that's out there. I've used facial coding. I actually was certified in being able to classify accurately people's micro expressions in terms of their emotional content. I got certified by Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen, who basically did the seminal work in that field. Then it sort of became AI based. So it was like sort of moment to moment classification through algorithms, looking at people's faces. I did a lot with that. I did a lot of stuff with uh, EMG, like electromyogram, basically, measuring if muscles are activated, measuring if sweat glands are activated, heart rate, blood pressure, even EEG and MRI. We did a study looking at people's reactions to different kinds of scenes and different kinds of content and mapping out sort of, what was the sort of emotional meaning and all that. And we also, got kind of went the other way also toward like projective techniques and hypnosis and all of those sorts of, sort of softer qualitative measures and trying to bring them together. What I was sort of disappointed with at the end of all of that was that I could measure with great accuracy if someone was emotionally aroused by a scene. There's a classic example where, when I was testing out this equipment, I was looking at a video of a woman who climbs out on the edge of a building, and you see sort of, from her GoPro view of her walking on the edge of this building on the sort of scaffolding, and it's very kind of nerve-wracking. And I could see suddenly my, sweat glands were pumping and my heart was racing. And then she comes off the building and it settles back down. Okay, so that's very good at that. What it can't tell you is what is the context. It can't tell you why does this matter to you, right? So it's very good at the sort of, in the moment, I'm feeling happy, sad, scared, delighted, etc. It's not good at speaking to the things that are critical in marketing. When you think about brand positioning and you think about the way that messaging works and positioning, it is somewhat abstract and it speaks to people's goals. It speaks to their emotional needs. It's much more sort of Maslow than it is, Pavlov.
Mhm.
It's not about whether I'm salivating. It's whether this meets my needs for self-actualization or my need for belonging, my need for safety, my need for esteem, that sort of thing. So that was the big insight. I was working in consulting at the time, and I kind of asked the question, why don't we have a way of kind of segmenting the world into their core motives? And we did some studies and kind of did some of the basic work, and that led to this model that I have of human emotional needs, which synthesizes all of the emotional needs, including Maslow and everybody else, more than 100 different motivational concepts into a single model. It's a 3x4 matrix. Um, so that's been a big deal for me.
That's awesome. So I want to just touch on something you said about brand positioning and that, and just talk about the connection to emotions, and maybe just use as an illustration of very popular a brand position. We might think of somebody like Nike with a
Right.
brand position of just do it. So how does that kind of connect to emotions
Hmm.
versus intellectual decision making? And then how do we think about that as marketers, in terms of the
Yeah.
scale? And maybe you could even speculate as to why a company like My Nike would go in that direction versus a more
Yeah.
logical message.
So the brilliance of Just Do It is that it's speaking to two different motives simultaneously. It speaks to the need for autonomy, which is in my model, it's this concept that we need to, like, we're basically like toddlers. We want to know that we have the permission and the ability and the competence to take action, use the toy, make it do what we want, we're at work, run the big machine, take on the big account. We're trusted to do it. We have permission and we have the ability and skill to move forward. So that's the do it. That's like you have permission, go forward. It's very similar to Home Depot. You can do it, we can help. You can do it. It's all about go. You have permission, go. It also speaks to the need for self-actualization. In my model, we call it potential, which is once I can do it, once I am able to do it, I can then become immersed in the doing and I can then grow. I can then broaden my horizons. I can then stretch into my potential and achieve, material success, but more importantly to that brand, that I'm going to actually actualize my potential.
Mhm.
So uh, I think the point is that all of these campaigns, the ones that are successful, begin with a clear focus on one or two emotional needs, and there are 12 of them. You got to pick them carefully. You got to know what your competitors are picking. Sometimes it's okay to pick the same one if you're going to take it in a different direction. But that's what starts that. That's what's driving the bus. In the consumer's mind, they have an emotional need. You're going to speak to fulfilling that emotional need if you're a brand, and uh, everything else is a kind of afterthought. As we've discussed now a couple of times, that sort of logical piece of it, that's going to come along for the ride. If you're appealing to people's emotions, you don't have to worry about logic.
So when you look at the world of kind of brand advertising and what's happening, and the products that are kind of B2C like Nike, or buying sneakers and other things, and there are B2B products. You might be looking at a new accounting system. You might be thinking about investing in a new website. You might be doing some
Hmm.
marketing services, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you're saying is that emotions work on both levels, right? It's not just we're emotional about our consumer purchases, but we're
Right.
very logical on our B2B purchases. But yet it seems like, in both those worlds of marketing, it's tempting for the B2B marketer to be much more logical, and we think that it's all structured. And in the consumer world, no, it's all going to be driven. Maybe we understand a little bit more about being driven by emotions. Why do you think that is?
Yeah.
And or do you actually believe that marketers are doing it differently in both worlds, or are we understanding it well in both segments?
Yeah. I mean, I was on another podcast not that long ago where I made this comment, which this always stays with me, that I think most marketers are delusional. I think that they basically drink their own Kool-Aid to an extent where they believe that whatever their imagined point of difference is actually matters to somebody. And then they lead with it, and they're very hesitant to let go of it because it's so, near and dear to their hearts. They grew up with it, especially if it's a family company. It's like there's a lot of emotion tied up with those points of difference. I just I feel like, that is very true in B2C, but it's even more so in B2B. And that leads you into this sort of logic trap where you have to, say, well, we've been around for 150 years, and that's a really good reason, why you should consider us. No one cares. No, literally no one cares. They care about this was the thing that was taught to me. I remember in my consulting career, why does somebody choose to give you $1 million contract to do, consumer research over somebody else? They have to believe that you know what you're doing and all of that sort of logical good stuff. But you have to, it has to feel good to them. And they have to also believe that you're going to make them look good. You're going to provide them with financial security and that they're going to keep their job. And that maybe it's going to help them get exposure and maybe it's going to help them get promoted. So there's a very personal, emotional reason why people make a B2B decision for one service provider over another, one product over another. And it comes very much down to how does it make that person feel, the decision maker feel? And we neglect that at our peril, to think that, regardless of how this person feels about me and my services, I'm going to somehow sway them with a list of benefits and features. There's no match there. The feelings will win every single time.
So people want to feel good and they want to look good, and those are two important things. But you mentioned 12 different emotional
Yeah,
areas. And we don't necessarily have to make a list on this podcast, but how do you use market research and other tools to identify which of those emotional triggers are most appropriate, to your target audience in your area? Because not may I'm going to guess that not every product should be about, hey, we make you look good and feel good. There may be other emotional triggers involved. how do
sure.
you how do you leverage research? How do
Yeah.
you get those insights? How do you learn about that, about people in your market? in your product to get that, insight that you need to really come up with messages and campaigns and the rest of what marketers do.
Sure. So I think the first answer to that is that it's the beauty of this framework, to come up with these 12 needs that accounts for basically every theory ever written about human motivation. If you have a framework, now all of a sudden we know we've accounted for everything. There isn't some other thing, or we haven't double counted something, or we haven't put in, way too much emphasis. And you see this in business books all the time. How many times do you hear about, the new theory of leadership is, servant leadership, or it's authentic leadership, or it's purpose-driven leadership, visionary leadership. Like, this is the thing, we found it. This is the thing. It's like, no, you haven't, because it's all of those things. And what you needed the whole time was a model that was comprehensive. It speaks to first principles and could let you know that this is the landscape. This is the waterfront of what leadership is, or what marketing, positioning is, what human motivation is, human goals, human values, all of those. Uh, Once we've identified that these are the parameters that define the space, now we can proceed with confidence. And that's basically what this model does. It says, motivation is just change. It's basically I want to change from one state to another. The first question is, where do I want to make a change? There's four answers to that question. I can make a change within myself, or I can make a change within my relationships with other people. So self versus social. I can make a change in the material world of objects and money and work and play, which is the material world, or I can make a change in the spiritual world of concepts and ideals, principles, right? Things you can't see. And as it turns out, those are, that wasn't my idea, but there are 12 different systems of world philosophy, religion, psychology that basically identify those are the four domains of human life.
Hmm.
We then cross that with a thing of Aristotle's, is from his metaphysics, that basically says there's three states of being. There's sort of a pure being, like a pure potential state. There's a state of becoming or doing, sort of acting on something. And then there's a state of having, a sort of actualization stage. And it's sort of like before, during, and after. There isn't another time slice that we can imagine. So if you take these three from Aristotle and you cross them by the four, you end up with 12 cells. And lo and behold, every one of Maslow's theories is there. We have safety is sort of, within the self at the foundational level. On top of that, we have authenticity, which is Erickson's thing about, sort of defining your own personality and identity. And then we have self-actualization on top of that. So how am I going to express my true self and sort of come out as who I am? I have to feel psychologically safe. Then I can be authentic. If I can be authentic, that's my first opportunity to actually be who I can be, right? If I'm speaking in my own voice, I can actually, write a great novel or do something amazing, write some great poetry. I can't do it if I'm speaking as my professor or my boss, ChatGPT. It needs to be in your authentic voice. That same logic extends to the other three domains. So it's basically you start with something foundational, you build on it with something experiential, and then you have something as an outcome. And then those are the 12. We also recognize that there's a push and pull, and people in marketing definitely understand this. There's vitamins and painkillers, right, as they put it. The push and pull. There's products that naturally are a pull, the iPhone. There's products like life insurance that are a push. And just the same way in motivation, every one of these 12 has a promotional phase. Like, I want more of the good. I want to feel ever safer. I want to feel ever more authentic or more, self-actualized. Or I can want to get rid of bad feelings in that same domain. Like, I want to get rid of my anxiety, my insecurity, my feeling pressure to conform, my feelings of limitation and stagnation. So we measure both of those, but we do it in a way that's incredibly efficient. So we do this in a 3-minute image-based exercise where all you do as a respondent is click a button. When you see an image that completes a sentence, imagine a sentence like, thinking about the direction my life is going, I wish I could feel a bit more. And then images will flash at you one every second. You have no time to think. That's on purpose. And you basically click the button when the image fits the prompt. It answers the sentence. And you go through this incredibly quickly. The first exercise is positive. The second one is negative, sort of promotion and prevention. The whole thing's done in 3 minutes. And then we have this incredible, you know, map to your emotional needs in that particular area. And that's been a game changer, I think, because survey time is very precious and expensive, and people just simply aren't willing to take surveys anymore. And this is something that's very gamified, app-based on any device, and gives you immediate feedback also, which you won't get from any other survey.
So you're describing the AgileBrain
Yeah,
service, right? So the capability to be able to show people these images, measure their emotional response, and then it sounds like what you're doing is you're tying that, or you're doing that connected to, the emotional state. You're understanding the emotional state of the personas in someone's target market, and then you use that to help them create messages or other things. So that's very, very powerful. So how do you connect that to kind of standard market research where we're understanding buyers' needs
hmm,
and behaviors? Is that, a kind of you're
yeah,
understanding them, you're helping, Agile Brain's helping understand the emotional state. Do I also ask all the standard buyer process, buyer persona,
sure.
wants
That
and,
there's something very powerful about the combination in that I can ask all of those questions that my delusional marketing friends uh, think matter, right? So they can come up with all of those different nuances that they love to, generate and put that into the same research. So I'll do my 3 minute thing. I'll get a sense of what emotions are important. You can tighten it up even more by saying, I choose this brand over competitors because it makes me feel more da da da. It makes me feel less da da da. Right
mm.
now, I'm getting a really sharp picture on why this brand is purchased. Then I can correlate all of those individual statements, every one of those little nuanced things with the feelings that are generated. And I can see the ones that are strong versus the ones that are weak. The fact that we've been in business for 200 years turns out, maybe that would be associated with safety, but the relationship is so weak as to be negligible. We can then conclude that what we thought it was delivering is actually not delivering. It might be coming across as you're just stodgy, uh, but it's a sort of a wake-up call for people who, you know, have these sort of false beliefs about what consumers think about their brand. It's a way to kind of bring it back into reality and say, okay, what are they feeling? And does that thing that they associate with your brand, that attribute, does it make any difference to how they're feeling?
So let me just ask you to frame that in the negative. So what are marketers missing if they don't do this getting an emotional understanding of their target audience when they're doing research and when they're trying to understand their marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're missing 90% of what's going on. You're again, the research couldn't be more clear, and because we are humans with, this apparatus of thinking logically, we trick ourselves into thinking it's really, really important, and we are very resistant to let this information in. The fact that we are truly driven by our emotions, that is indisputable at this point. And that if we're not measuring emotions in a real way, I mean, not in some, cockamamie, I'm going to give you a list of happy, sad, angry, afraid, and you're going to check off boxes. I mean, that's a rational exercise, and it doesn't speak at all to emotional needs. What we're really talking about here is motivation, right? You need to be measuring motivation in an authentic way. If you are doing that, and there's many different ways of doing it, then you've got something to build on. If you're not doing that, you're kind of just, working around the edges. You're not actually addressing the issue head on at all. And we have tons of published papers now that basically speak to the primacy of these kinds of emotional needs. We did a study recently in biotech. We just off of this 3 minute exercise, we could predict with 80% accuracy who was going to quit their jobs and who was going to stay,
Wow.
because it's powerful. It's saying my emotional needs here are being met or they're not being met. You apply that to the consumer world. This brand is meeting my emotional needs or it's not. And those things drive behavior in a big way.
So you can help people measure motivation, measure emotions, connect the dots between that and their research, and help marketers, in this example, create better campaigns. They're going to reach their target audience and connect with those emotional needs to be much more effective. So it's very powerful, JD. I've learned a lot here. It feels like if marketers aren't doing this, they're just freaking guessing, right?
Yeah,
We're just kind of
absolutely.
guessing. It feels like they might like something. Yeah, just do it. Oh yeah, I can come up with, so we're just kind of like
Right.
we're guessing, and it sounds
Yeah.
like you've got a very systematic approach that uncovers these in a deep way that then connects the dots. The research connects the dots, the campaign, the messaging, so we can really understand what's going on. Very powerful, JD.
Awesome. Oh, so I got a couple of plugs to give before we go,
Yes, go ahead.
if there's time. So the first is my book. It's called The Emotionally Agile Brain, Mastering the 12 Emotional Needs That Drive Us. There's a chapter to each one of these 12 emotional needs. It talks about how I came up with the theory and the power of it, and it talks about Agile Brain and how that came to be. And that is on Amazon and elsewhere. Um, and the other thing is, you're talking, David, about, sort of the power of this and how do we get this into the hands of marketers. We have a kind of spin-off company now called Motivation Metrics, which is we're taking this data now, we're collecting it monthly on very large samples, and what we're doing is being able to kind of, through database modeling, blow it up to the universe and then make it available through a variety of different, third-party data providers.
Hmm.
We're trying to get this on AWS. We want to get into Axiom and Experian and all those folks. Then you've got something that's truly different. You've got something that speaks to, I want a list, not of people who, live, within 10 miles of a Stop and Shop. I want a list of people who are all about achievement. I want a list of people who are all about immersion in the moment. I want a list of people who are, feeling excluded and want to feel that sense of inclusion. Now, now we're cooking with gas. Now we're talking about the segments are defined in the language of marketing.
Hmm. Very powerful. So you've got some great solutions for marketers, some terrific ideas, and a lot of ways you can help. If one of our listeners, wants to reach out to you to connect with you, learn more about you, your book, your services, the company, how would they do that?
Yeah, you can just find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest thing. JD Pincus, and you can just reach out to me. My email is jdavid at jdavid.pincus, I should say, at agilebrain.com. AgileBrain is one word.
And I should probably add the best way to get to know you is to buy your book, right?
That's right.
It's always a good thing. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today. Fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, David.